you're being told that Russia is your only enemy, then you might start believing anything and everything. The facts, the evidence here are superfluous. Today, we're compelled to be here to watch part 2 of this spectacle entitled Blame Russia for Everything. Our neighbors have now imagined that Russia is at fault for an incursion into Estonian airspace. As always, there is no proof except the Russophobic hysteria coming from Tallinn, which our Estonian colleague will wax lyrical about a little bit later. As for the facts prove that on the 19th of September, 3 Russian MiG-31 fighter jets conducted a planned flight from Karelia to an airbase in Kaliningrad Oblast, carried out in strict accordance with international airspace use rules. The Russian aircrafts did not stray from the agreed route, nor did they cross into Estonian airspace. Their trajectory, their flight was over the neutral waters of the Baltic Sea, over 3 kilometers from the island of Vindlo. Flight recorded data confirm this. If Estonia wanted to, it could have checked this itself. But Tallinn is not pursuing such an objective. Their goal is different, going against common sense and the facts to foment hysteria and accuse Russia of provocations. Thus, NATO representatives rushed to call what happened reckless behavior. And the head of European diplomacy, who also happens to be Estonian, called for a firm stance in support of the Baltic states. To be perfectly frank, our European colleagues deserve our sympathies. After all, the project they'd been building on our borders for years, the anti-Russia project, and this is what Ukraine was actually turned into after 2014, this project is coming apart at the seams, discrediting itself. Ukraine became the Zelensky concentration camp long ago. It's not sparing its people. They're dying by the thousands every day in a senseless meat grinder in the name of Western geopolitical interests. The Zelensky regime has turned its country into a symbol of corruption, outright theft, violations of human rights, the freedom of religion and the freedom of speech. In European capitals, despite all of this, they continue to laud so-called Ukrainian achievements, giving money and weapons to the Kiev regime, although they're clearly increasingly ashamed of their own puppets. However, they can't understand how to disentangle themselves from this fix. As a result, not-so-creative Euro bureaucrats have found nothing better to do than to whip up anti-Russian hysteria in the hope that European voters won't notice. This is a strange strategy, and without a doubt, it will achieve the opposite of what it intends to do. What will they accuse Russia of next? After all, they're not bothering to check the evidence nor the logical rationale for our actions. It's hard to think where their imaginations will take us next when no one cares about the facts. President, without a doubt, we understand that the hysteria of our European colleagues is also directed at trying to return the new U.S. administration, including President Trump, to an anti-Russia course. It's aimed at undermining the understandings and undertakings entered into by Russia and the U.S. by their presidents in Alaska a month ago. On this note, I'd like to quote the U.S. Vice President, J.D. Vance, who, at the Munich Security Conference at the start of this year, voiced some uncomfortable conclusions, uncomfortable for Europe. The threat, and here I quote, the threat that I worry about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, not China. It's not any other actor, external actor. What I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States, end of quote. Despite this clear-cut diagnosis contained in the aforementioned quote, Europe decided not to listen. Europe today is like an unhinged, paranoid individual unable to respond to criticism. Nor is it able to remember the lessons of history. After all, for the current cast of European leaders and Euro bureaucrats, history was reset to zero in February of 2022. Thus, drawing the lessons of history for today's Europe is bad manners. But this is a very dangerous path. We all know that history is ruthless vis-a-vis those who forget its lessons. Thus, our former European partners, if you want to get hysterical, to foment and to continue levy baseless accusations, go right ahead. But do that without our participation. We won't be partaking in this theatre of the absurd, and you don't need us there. When you decide that you want to engage in a serious discussion about European security, about the fate of our common continent, about how to make this continent prosperous and secure for everybody, we'll be ready. You know where to find us. I thank you.
Your Excellencies, thank you, President. Please allow me to thank the Presidency for convening the Security Council meeting at such a short notice. And I also would like to thank ASG Jensa for his valuable briefing. Ladies and gentlemen, what brings us here today is alarming. On 19 September 2025, 3 armed Russian MiG-31 fighter jets deliberately entered Estonian airspace in violation of our territorial integrity. They remained in our skies for 12 minutes, penetrating up to 10 kilometers deep and covering nearly 100 kilometers inside our sovereign territory. These are the hard facts based on solid evidence, whatever Russia is claiming. And let me show you the screenshot from our most modern radar screenshot. So you can see here as well, the red line is a violation of Estonian territory and sovereignty. You can see it very clearly. This is a fact. This is not something else. So here you can say, you can also see the radar screenshot where Russia fighter jets entered, where they were, and how they went out. They were warned already before. There was a very clear communication on all different channels as well visibly. And there was no response, and just Russian fighter jets, they continued the violation of Estonian and also NATO airspace for 12 minutes, 100 kilometers. And this is a lot. And these are the hard evidences for that. Also, there are pictures of these fighter jets, and it is very clear that these fighter jets, they carried as well missiles. All of them, they carried missiles, and they were combat-ready planes. And you can see from here as well, Russian representatives, that these are the photos which really were taken during this heavy violation of NATO and Estonian airspace. So what I want to say, that violation is crystal clear, and Russia is lying again, as it has been lied before several times. We remember the occupation of Georgia, 2008, 2014, Crimea, 2022, aggression against Ukraine started. So please don't lie again. Hard evidence is here. So it is a dangerous escalation. It was a 4th violation of Estonia's airspace by Russia this year alone. By this one was deeper, longer, with 3 armed aircraft simultaneously and just minutes flight time away from Tallinn, our capital. I want to recall that member states' sovereignty and territorial integrity on land, at sea, and in the air must be respected at all times. So this was yet another reckless and flagrant violation of the United Nations Charter and of international law by our neighbor. We are here today because this violation of our sovereignty and threat of use of force concerns not only Estonia, but the entire international community. The 19 September incursion was not an isolated act, but part of a broader pattern of Russian provocations against its neighbors, while the permanent member of the Security Council continues its full-scale war of aggression against Ukraine. On 9th of September, Russia presently violated Poland's borders by sending 19 drones into Poland's airspace. On 13th of September, a Russian attack drone flew for almost an hour over Romanian territory. Russian drones have been also found in Latvia and Lithuania, our neighboring countries. Russia's dangerous behavior cannot be tolerated. To do so would seriously undermine not only the United Nations Charter and the international law, but would set very dangerous precedent, encouraging further aggression, fueling regional and global tensions, and ultimately endangering global peace and security. Ladies and gentlemen, for the first time in 34 years since Estonia joined the United Nations, we were obliged to ask the Presidency to convene this meeting in the spirit of the preventive diplomacy and in order to stop immediately attempts at further escalation by Russia. We use this occasion to call again on the Russian Federation loud and clear to cease, without delay, its war of aggression against sovereign Ukraine and to abide by the obligations enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. We call on Russia to end all provocations and threats against its neighbors' sovereignty and territorial integrity. The international community must stand firm in demanding an end to these blatant breaches of the United Charter in order to prevent further escalation and to ensure international peace and security. Ladies and gentlemen, Estonia is convinced that all responsible members of the international community should always call out such outrageous actions by any member of the United Nations, and even more so by a permanent member of the Security Council, entrusted with a special responsibility to safeguard international peace and security. And yet, words are not enough. As Russia itself has become a real threat to global peace and security, we need to exercise collectively maximum pressure on Russia, forcing it to just and lasting peace in Ukraine and forcing it to abandon its criminal, neo-colonial and imperial ambitions. Together we can hold Russia accountable for its crime of aggression against Ukraine, for the war crimes and crimes against humanity it has committed since 2014, and for its ongoing violations of international treaties and agreements it has pledged to uphold. Impunity, appeasement and further concessions would only embolden Putin and would lead to new crimes. We can succeed only if acting decisively together in defense of the United Nations Charter and the international law. Finally, let me assure that the members of the Security Council and wider audience that Russia's threats and provocations are not going to weaken our resolve to support Ukraine in its defense against the Russian aggression. Just and lasting peace in Ukraine will strengthen the multilateral system based on international law, with the United Nations and its Charter at the core, as well as international peace and security across the globe. Thank you, President.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Takna for the statement.